الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ثم ما بعد. اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا وأنت خير الراحمين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا اصرف عنا عذاب جهنم إن عذابها كان غراما إنها ساءت مستقرا ومقاما. اللهم انصر الإسلام وأعز المسلمين واعلو برحمتك كلمة الحق والدين. اللهم اغفر لنا ولآبائنا وأمهاتنا وارحمهما كما ربنا صغارا. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. اللهم انصر أهلنا في فلسطين وانصر أهلنا في سوريا يا رب العالمين. اللهم وحد صفحهم وبارك جمعهم وانصرهم على أعدائهم وأعدائنا. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. So we're resuming inshallah tonight part 2 of the Battle of Mu'tah, which just as a quick review, what year are we in? What year are we in? Not the Gregorian. What year of Hijrah are we in? 8th year of Hijrah, mashallah, 8th year of Hijrah. So we're in the 8th year of Hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Those are all fantastic attempts, by the way, mashallah. So I miss you, Allah, I miss you all. So 8th year of Hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if you recall, the reasons for this particular ghazwa was that the Prophet ﷺ had sent a companion called Al-Harith ibn Nu'aym al-Asadi to make da'wah to the Ghasasina, who are the Christian Arabs that lived in the northern Arabian Peninsula. So if you imagine for a second the Arabian Peninsula, right, as it's known today, the topmost part of it, halfway to what is about Jordan today, was occupied by the Romans. So if you just picture Turkey today, what we call Sham, which is Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, up into Egypt, really all the way into across North Africa. So Egypt, modern day Libya, Tunisia, that was all Roman territory. And the Romans, because they were a superpower, had what they called satellite states, just like you have nowadays, just like you have today. Nothing has changed. So, the US as a superpower has its own states that are aligned to it, some in terms of alliances and some that follow its instructions. And the Ghassanite Arabs are the same way. They follow the instructions of the Romans, right? So while they're Arab, they're Christian, and their allegiance is really to the Roman emperor. And the name of the Roman emperor is Heraclius. Okay, so we're really coming off a vacation. We need a review. Okay, so Heraclius is the king of the Romans. He's the Roman emperor. And so the Ghassani king, whose name is Shurahbil ibn Amr, he captures the messenger of the Prophet ﷺ and he tortures him and he kills him. And then he starts to make threats against the Muslims. Now the Muslims are all the way in Medina. The Muslims are not there. The Muslims are quite a distance far away from them. But he starts to make the threats to the Muslims. And it's because of that the Prophet ﷺ gathers an army and he sends an army to Mu'tah. Now, why is this called a ghazwa? Is it called a ghazwa? Because he saw it live, okay. Well, that's not mentioned in the books of Sirah. That's a good one. He's the one that initiated, but he initiated most of the ghazawat, and some of them are not called ghazawat, they're called saraya. Right? Participation? No, he did not participate. He did not participate in Mu'tah. So the Prophet ﷺ sent the army, but he stayed back in Medina. But your definition is correct. The general definition of a ghazwa in terms of Sirah is that the Prophet ﷺ participated himself. The others are called saraya, right? Which means, an expedition. So this was not one where the Prophet ﷺ went, but the books of Sirah still mention it as a ghazwa for various reasons. One of which is that the sheer number of the Sahaba that went was huge. How many Sahaba went on this ghazwa? 3,000. Huge number. By all other standards, by all the standards of Badr and Uhud, this was a massive number of companions that went. So that's one reason. The other reason is that the Sahaba themselves had a name. They called that name Jaysh al-Umara, the army of leaders, because it had so many of the senior leadership of the Sahaba personally appointed by the Prophet ﷺ. And they went north, they traveled north. We'll go through this quickly and not go into as much detail as we did last time. It takes them roughly 1.5 months to travel from Medina to the territory of Mu'tah, which, by the way, today is where, in which country? Jordan. Today, Mu'tah is in Jordan, right? It's in a province called Man, which is in northern part. So the Prophet ﷺ sends the army to Jordan, and he appoints 3 successive leaders. He said, your number 1 leader will be Zayd ibn Haritha radiallahu anhu. Number 2, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. Number 3, Abdullah ibn Rawaha, mashallah. And everyone has his own sense of heroism, if you like. All the Sahaba are heroes, but everyone has their own sense of heroism. Each one of these people that were selected by the Prophet ﷺ. Zayd, for example, is, fill in the blank, adopted son, but more importantly, all of this is correct. He's the love of the Prophet ﷺ. He's his adopted son, which stopped. Mentioned in the Quran. He's mentioned in the Quran. What higher status can you have? He's mentioned in the Quran. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib is who to the Prophet ﷺ? His cousin. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib is his cousin. And Abdullah ibn Rawaha is one of the poets of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ had many poets. This was one of the poets. And the poetry was important at the time because the poetry was the media. If today you have CNN and Fox News and this and this and that, at the time the equivalent of that was the poets, right? So the poets played a very important role. So Abdullah ibn Rawaha was one of these poets of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ, if you remember, he escorted the army up to a place called Thaniyat al-Wada', mashallah. So Thaniyat al-Wada' was the outskirts of Medina. Like in the same way today that we take someone to the airport, shake their hand, give them a hug before they travel, right? Thaniyat al-Wada' was the equivalent of that place. And the Prophet ﷺ made dua for them, and then they embarked on their journey. And lots of details happened on the way. We're not going to get into all the details. We covered that last time. But the Ghasasina themselves, when they saw the Muslims coming through, they panicked and they sent to the Romans. So they sent for the Roman allies to come and help them. And sure enough, the Roman allies came and deployed anti-defense weaponry. Okay, the Roman allies came in and they deployed what? Roman soldiers, right? So they sent them multiple divisions to help support them. Some of them were Greek, some of them were Roman, some of them were supplementary Arab tribes from the area. So they gathered 20,000 men to face off against the 3,000. By the way, when you read books of Sirah, some of the books of Sirah will register as much as 100,000 on the opposite side. Allah Alam, I don't personally think that this is actually true. I think that number is a bit exaggerated. It's closer to 20,000, 15,000 to 20,000 is what the Romans gathered against the Arabs, against the Muslims. And so the Muslims are now facing off against that army. And then we know that the leaders became shuhada one after the other. So the landscape of Mu'tah, they were, by the way, Mu'tah was a very strategic place for the Muslims to have picked. It has rivers, it has farmland. So they're in enemy territory. Like effectively the Muslims are fighting in enemy territory, and they don't have the equivalent of a supply chain back to Medina. First of all, the distance is massive. That territory doesn't belong to the Muslims. So it's all in enemy territory, this battle. That's how dangerous this is. So they pick apart that they can get water from the river, they can get crops from the land, and behind them are hills, not quite a mountain, but it's a hilly area, right? And so Mu'tah itself is flat and it's a hilly area, and that's where they face off in front of the Romans, and the battle starts, right? And so effectively they smash into each other. The Romans are incurring very heavy losses. So while the other army is massive, the Muslims, mashallah, they're encouraging each other. They're fighting fi sabilillah, so they're incurring heavy losses on the Romans, and one after the other, each of these leaders, each of these companions dies as a shaheed, right? So Zayd radiallahu anhu dies, and Ja'far radiallahu anhu, he becomes a shaheed, and then Abdullah ibn Rawaha also dies as shaheed. And in Medina, the Prophet ﷺ is transmitting this news live to the companions radiallahu anhum in the Masjid Nabawi. So the Prophet ﷺ is sitting with the companions that did not go, and he's effectively telling them this news. And Thabit ibn Arqam then takes the leadership of the army after Ibn Rawaha passes away. After Ibn Rawaha is killed, Thabit ibn Arqam is the one that takes the flag, and he takes the flag and he backs up with the army. He retreats with the Muslim army back into these hills. So they've now retreated into the hills. It's the end of the day. The Romans won't attack, right? And there was kind of this pseudo understanding between armies at the time that fighting was mainly in daytime, right? So for whatever reason, they fought it. The major big clashes happened at daytime, right? And then the army rested. It's a little bit like a 9-to-5 job, kind of like that. They fought, went back to rest, fought, went back to rest, and so forth, right? So he backs up into the mountains, and he basically now he doesn't want the leadership, because the companions, he asked them. He's like, who do you think should be the next leader? And what did the companions say? You. They said you. Right? So you think about it, if we're together, right? And Brother Jafar has the flag, and he says, who wants to be there? He's like, you've already got the flag. Allah bismillah, right? So he says, no, we need someone more qualified. And he picks, and he says, what do you think about Khalid ibn Walid? Now, what's the problem with Khalid ibn Walid at the time? He's brand new. He's brand new. He's right off of the dealership. Right? He knows very little about Islam. And so even when they offer it to him, he's like, why are you guys picking me? I'm like the newest amongst you in this. And they say, no. And by the way, what was his kunya? So his name was Khalid ibn Walid. Khalid, right? What was his kunya? Kunya. Abu Sulaiman, mashallah. His name was Abu Sulaiman, right? So they said, pick Abu Sulaiman, pick the father of Sulaiman, right? Meaning Khalid ibn Walid. So then he accepts and he takes it. And effectively, when you think of it, if you're a leader at the time of the special forces and you're surrounded by 20,000 men, you know that this is not winnable. You understand? Like there's point in time where you have to just make estimates and you go, can I win this or can I not win this? So he comes up with a plan to continue to inflict losses on the enemy while taking minimum losses himself. And he comes up with a brilliant strategy for what you would call today a safe retreat, right? So what does he do? The armies in those days were a little bit simpler than they are today. So he had like a center part to the army, a central part to the army. It's called the Maymana, the group to the right, and then a group to the left. And Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu does the following: he swaps the right and the left, and he takes the center, the people in the center, and he swaps the front and the back, and then he starts to light up many fires in the hills. More fires in the hills. So the Romans are across, they're watching them. And so the indication of more fires at night would signify that the Muslims are getting reinforcements. They're getting reinforcements from Medina. So more people are coming to fight on the Muslim side, right? And then he creates another interesting tactic, which is he lets the horsemen behind the hills travel and create a wind of dust that again makes them think like more cavalry is coming. And cavalry was like the heavy equipment of the time, right? So the next day, then, when they face off in front of the Romans, he encourages them. He goes into the battle, and they're fighting. And the Romans are like, wait, these people are different to the people that we fought yesterday. They're not the same people. They must be new. So then a rumor starts to spread within the enemy ranks that the Muslims are just getting a constant supply of new men. We can't keep up with these guys. Look how many losses we're inflicting, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, he makes a very strong push against them, causes massive losses on the Roman side, and then starts what you would call today an orderly retreat back to the hills, and then he leaves Mu'tah and he heads back to Medina. This tactic that Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid deployed in terms of attack and defense and then retreat is taught today even in military strategies, even with modern day armies and the fact that there's airplanes and all the rest of it. That technique that he employed is still used today by many people. So anyway, if you're into military strategy, you should read up on that. So the Muslim army now goes back safely to Medina, and then very first hadith that I'm going to recount about the Prophet ﷺ is what happens with the people of Medina when they go back, when the army goes back to Medina. So one of the first things that happens is that the people, some of the people of Medina anyway, they start to call them cowards. They start to call them cowards, right? So or runaways, right? And the Prophet ﷺ then he finds out, alayhi salatu wasalam, because he asks about one of the companions. He runs into the wife of one of the companions and he asks her, "Where is your husband? I haven't seen him. Like he's not He's not coming to the masjid. And she says, Ya Rasulullah, the people are saying that the army that came back from Medina, they ran away. They ran away, right? And they used to say to them, "Afarartum min sabilillah? Did you run away, from sabilillah? Did you run away from a struggle fi sabilillah?" And the Prophet ﷺ responded to all of them, and he says, "Qala," the Prophet ﷺ said, "Hum laysa bifurrar walakin bikurrar." Look at the beauty of the language and the genius of the Prophet ﷺ. Furrar in Arabic means to retreat or to run away. Kurrar in Arabic, by replacing one harf, the ba to the kaf, means someone who attacks, someone who plays offense versus someone who plays defense. So the Prophet ﷺ responded to them, and he used the same verb that they were using. He said they're not furrar, but in fact they're kurrar, right? So they are in fact the winners in this, and no one should call them an army that retreated and so forth. So first question I'm going to ask you, based now on all the information that you have, was Mu'ta, what was Mu'ta? Was it a win? Was it a loss? Or was it a tie? A win. Win. How many people are on the win side? Win. Okay, mashallah. Okay, loss. You can't be both. I already have you in the win category. Okay. Anyone else? Tie? Any points of view? Okay. So wow. So only like 20% said wins, and no one else responded, and the rest are undecided. Okay. Strategical win. Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay. So did you guys hear what the brother just said? The non-Muslims would say that they declared it as a win for the other side and not for the Muslims. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Great. Okay. So let me now respond to each of the points of view. Okay. So there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that we mentioned last time. The Prophet ﷺ, when Khalid bin Walid takes the leadership, what did he say? Does anyone remember this hadith? He said, Issalam al-raya. So he says, he received the raya, he received the flag, a sword from the swords of Allah. فَتَحَ اللَّهُ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ. So the leadership was given to one of the swords of Allah, and victory will be on his hand. So everyone that's in the win camp, by the way, including the Muslim scholars, say that's it. That hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in of itself, from Aqidah perspective, indicates that 100% this is a fath, this is a win. Just like, and by the way, they use the analogy of so remember the disagreements that occurred in Hudaybiyah? Remember Hudaybiyah, what happened? The companions didn't want to go. Do you remember that situation, right? So companions went for the Umrah. They, you think about it nowadays for us. Let's just replay that for a second. You pack up your stuff. You get the visa. You pay for the tickets. You reserve the hotel. You leave your family or take your family, whatever you're doing. You take 24 hours to get to Mecca, and when you get to the airport, they say, "Sorry, go back. We have no place for you." Like, you remember, Hudaybiyah was like that, right? So the Sahaba were not very happy, and you remember how some of them reacted. Yet, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveal right after? إِنَّا فَتَحْنَا لَكَ فَتْحًا مُبِينًا. Surah Al-Fath, which literally means victory, came right after Hudaybiyah, when some of the companions thought this was not a victory, right? So the indication of the Prophet ﷺ, فَتَحَ اللَّهُ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ, is an indication that it is a complete victory. Now, others, and by the way, this is the opinion of Ibn Kathir, Imam al-Bayhaqi, Musa ibn Uqba, of the opinion of many of the scholars of Sirah and of Hadith of Quran. So others say it's a loss, like the brother was saying, because effectively the Muslims retreated, right? And others say it's a draw. Ibn Ishaq says it's a draw. Zayd al-Ma'ad says it's a draw, and they count it like Uhud. So Uhud was not a defeat in the way that we sometimes speak about it. Uhud effectively was no win for the Quraysh, right? So they count it as a draw. So the side, and then the argument that they use is neither side defeated the other, and neither took prisoners of war. This is true. However, on the winner side, so now let's go back and analyze what I just said. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is 100% sahih, 100% correct. This is my personal opinion that we have to count it as a win. In addition, now on a military perspective, did the Muslims leave? 100%. However, the Muslims took less than a 1% loss compared to hundreds, maybe thousands by the other side. Although we don't know the exact number of losses on the Roman side, but effectively that was a massive head count loss for them from that perspective. The second thing that you'll hear about in a second is the Muslims did take bounty from the battle. So even from a military perspective, they took away battle bounty that the other side did not take, right? So even from a military perspective. We'll talk about results as well, even militarily in a second. So these are the three opinions. The predominant opinion obviously was that it's a win because that's what the Prophet ﷺ said in his hadith. Okay. We know when the Prophet ﷺ went back to Medina, we learn all the hadith about death and about making food for the family of the one that passed away. So in the case of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, they were crying, and the Prophet ﷺ sent someone to tell them to stop crying, and he'd come back to the Prophet ﷺ and say, they won't stop crying, and he sent him again, and the Prophet ﷺ at the end said, then just let them go. Let them be. And then he said, when he went to visit the family of Ja'far 3 days after he came back. So 3 days after they heard the news, he went to visit them, and the famous hadith of Isna'u li ali Ja'fara ta'aman, make food for the family of Ja'far. By the way, another important point, just before we move off of the battle, there's an important lesson here when it comes to shahada fi sabilillah, right? Like if you think about it, if Khalid ibn Walid and the companions that were there in Mu'tah all wanted to have shahada, they could have just stayed. Like potentially they could have just waited. But the perspective on shahada is different here, though. It's actually one of the other lessons we learn. Shahada means you're doing something fi sabilillah, and then at the end, Allah counts you as a shaheed. You get picked as a shaheed, right? Shahada isn't just to show up for the sake of showing up. You understand? Like shahada also has a sense of we have to think about what we're doing, right? There's benefits to how they retreat, right? So very small loss, as I said, less than 1% of the army. By the way, how many Sahaba is that? Does anyone know? 15. So by most books of Sirah, 15 Sahaba, after these massive conflicts, 15 Sahaba, including the three famous ones, were the ones that became Shuhada. Okay, so when he went, the Prophet ﷺ said, make them food. He said, after 3 days, let no one cry for my brother as of today. So yeah, he indicates also that even when someone passes away, we may be hit with a sense of mourning. Of course, it's very normal. You take time off of work, etc., etc. But in other words, start to collect yourself, start to rebuild yourself, after 3 days. Now, this is different to what? From a family perspective, for the women. Different to iddah, right? Iddah is different. But from a mourning, from a family perspective, the Prophet ﷺ said, he said this limit, basically of 3. It doesn't mean you can't be sad, obviously, afterwards, but he's basically teaching the ummah what? What's he teaching the ummah? Patience and collect yourself, get up and get back to work. Right? Collect yourself, get up and get back to work. Do whatever you were doing before, right? And then the other thing is that we know as human beings, subhanAllah, what's the biggest cure to these events? What's the biggest cure? Someone has a death in the family, let's say, or whatever. Time, subhanAllah. Time is a natural healer that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, right? So time heals everything, right? So the Prophet ﷺ teaches us that, it's time to start to heal. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ, when he was sitting, this is a hadith narrated by Abdullah, the son of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. So he's still in the house. So we're still with the Prophet ﷺ in the house of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, 3 days after his wife finds that he martyred in the battle. And Ja'far says, the Prophet ﷺ came to our house, and our house was like our hair was like chickens, meaning it had been completely unkept, right? And it was like big and everything. And you understand, like the mother's mourning, everyone's upset, the father just passed away. So he says, the house, our hair is like chickens. And the Prophet ﷺ said, call for a barber. He took the ownership himself of getting a barber to cut the hair of the boys, right? He had 2 boys. And he says, as for Muhammad, Muhammad was the younger boy. He says, he looks like my uncle Abu Talib. He looks like my uncle Abu Talib. And as for Abdullah, he looks like me and he acts like me. These are the sons of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, right? By the way, so Abu Talib, my uncle Abu Talib, what's his relationship to Muhammad, to Abdullah? Grandfather, mashallah. You guys following this? Some people are doing algebra here in the back, mashallah. Okay, so the grandfather, right? The grandfather. Okay, so he says that this is that, and then he looks at the mother. Actually, before that, the Prophet ﷺ holds the hand of the older brother, and he makes a dua for him. And he makes this dua 3 times. He says, Allahumma akhlif li ali Ja'fari khayra. Allahumma akhlif li ali Ja'far. He makes a dua for them that may Allah bless the family of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib and allow them to flourish. And he holds the hand of the bigger boy, of the elder boy, and he says, may Allah bless him in all his safaqat. What is safaqat? Yeah, deals, business transactions. And he says this 3 times, right, to the older boy, right? And then he tells them that your father has been substituted to wings. And I looked at the hadith. There's actually quite a few hadith that speak about the wings of Sayyidina Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. One of them describes as the wings are made of, anyone know? Rubies. The wings are made of rubies, right? And he is flying around in Jannah as he pleases. Who is the wife of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib? Asma bint. Look at you guys, mashallah. What's her last name? Asma bint Umais. What was her thing? Do you remember? What's her claim to fame? Asma bint Umais. Yeah, remember the little argument with Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab, right? After Khaybar, he comes back and he says, "Oh, you're the seafaring lady. Meaning you're the one that was in Habasha." And she says, yes. And he says, well, we're better than you because we made Umrah with the Prophet. We made Hijrah with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And she gets infuriated with Umar radiallahu anhu. And she goes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and she asks him in the message. She said, Ya Rasulullah, Umar ibn Khattab is saying this about us. He's saying they're better because they made Hijrah with you. And he says, go back and tell Umar you're better because you made 2 Hijrahs. One to Habasha and one back to Medina, right? Okay. So this is now the wife of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. After Ja'far ibn Abi Talib dies, Asma ibn Umais first marries Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. After Abu Bakr as-Siddiq dies, she marries Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, right? This teaches us a lesson. What do you think is the lesson in that? What do you think is the lesson in that? Yeah, there's no stigma about divorce in Islam. We've made this a modern day thing. We've made this a modern day thing in our culture. There's no stigma about divorce or about that. Right? So the Sahaba didn't have this problem. They didn't have some of these complexes that we have. Oh, she was married before. Doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter, right? And she marries 2 companions. She marries Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. She actually has a boy with him. And then she marries later on Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, right? So she marries 2 after that. And there's a wonderful story here I just want to recount. So the boys of Asma radiallahu anha are arguing, right? They're arguing. So yes, they're arguing who is the best. So they say the following. So one of them says, I am better because I am the son of the one who made Hijrah with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the other says, no, I am better because my father has wings and he's flying in Jannah, right? So Ali ibn Abi Talib, he didn't have children with her. He hears this and he calls her. He says, hey, can you come and be a judge between your boys? Because I don't know how to fix this problem, right? Help me be a judge between the boys. So she says the following. She says, as for the young man, Ja'far is the leader of all the young men. And as for the older one, Abu Bakr is the leader of all the older men, right? So she diffused it by making them both kind of happy. And by the way, what did Sayyidina Ali say after this? So what have you left for me? Right? So this is the end of this hadith. Right? Sayyidina Ali says, so what have you left for me? Right? Okay. So alhamdulillah. So there's just a point here that I want to remark, which is, and some modern day Muslims have this, alhamdulillah, we don't. This shows you that there is no tension whatsoever. There never existed any tension in the Muslim community between Ahlul Bayt and the companions of Allah. And there was never any tension. There was never any sense of who's better, or who's worse, or who's this, or who's more deserving, that some factions have created nowadays. We don't have this problem. Everyone, alhamdulillah, is getting along together. When the Prophet ﷺ, last hadith, in the house of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, after he died, Asma bint Umays is very upset. And when the Prophet ﷺ says to her, why are you so upset? Like, she already knows her husband is in Jannah. He's made the dua for the boys. And she says, who will care for them? Who will care for the boys? And the Prophet ﷺ said, are you concerned for the boys? And then he says, Ana waliyuhum fi dunya wal akhirah. He says, I will take care of them in dunya and in akhirah, right? So what better assurance can someone have because of that? And the lesson that we have for this is care for the orphans. Care for the orphans. This is not something that we should ever negate as a society. Even within our small local community, if we find out, subhanAllah, that someone passed away and they left young children and whatever, we should do our best specifically to go and to give to that person. Besides what we do, alhamdulillah, to other organizations and people overseas in need. But even on a local community level, I think we need a better system of just making sure that we check up on people. Like last Jummah, day before yesterday, I was in UW, and a brother came to me, a Palestinian brother who came as a refugee from Gaza, and the man has horror stories, right? And he's here with his family. He's looking for a job. He's actually not looking for a handout, and I admired him for this. Like he's in trouble. He needed a month's rent. In the masjid in UW, the brothers, mashallah, set up a fund and all that. But he actually is not looking for a handout. He's like, listen, I used to be in construction. His biggest problem is because he just came to the US, he doesn't speak English, right? But he's like, I'm a painter. I can do tiles. I can do sheetrock. I can do this. I can do that. We should really keep an eye out for these people because we all have needs, whether they're at home or whether they're masjid maintenance or this, and look up for these kind of people. So this is the lesson from them, and then the food, making the food for them. By the way, the other lesson that we learned from this, the visit of the Prophet ﷺ to the house of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, is when we go for azat, when someone has passed away, we go for azat, to stay, but not to stay for too long. Like, we don't make it a social event. We don't turn it into we're there for 45 minutes and we're talking about jokes and we're doing this. We're going to console them to make them feel better, however you feel that that's fit. But it's not meant to be an extended stay where we're now going to start to watch the Eagles versus who are they playing? The Eagles and the Packers, right, tonight. But no New Falls football. Okay. So we're not going to do that. Okay. So this is it. By the way, another thing that I just want to say, which is makruh, which we've picked up in Egypt as a habit. Okay, I don't know if they still do this. I'm about to say in Egypt or not, but I know that some of my great aunts from my mother's side, this was like a big deal in the family. One of the things that is makruh in Islam after someone has passed away is for the family of the person that passed away to make food for the people that are coming. You understand? This is actually makruh. The Prophet ﷺ said not to do that. The opposite is what is the sunnah. The opposite is the sunnah. The sunnah is that the rest of the community make food for the person that passed away, right? But and I don't know if other countries have this or not, but like we had this, we have this in Egypt, and it's a terrible tradition. Yeah, they make the food. It's the exact opposite of what the sunnah should be. The sunnah should be the exact opposite, right? In fact, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, there's a hadith mentioned by Jabir ibn Abdullah. He said, we used to consider that if the host family makes the food for the people coming to visit, we used to consider that as bad as niyaha, which the Prophet ﷺ had completely prohibited. Niyaha is when the women are screaming and they're like, how could this happen? Who's going to take care of us? The Prophet ﷺ made this completely haram, right? This was one of the traditions of the Jahiliyyah, right? So this is not permitted in Islam. The Prophet ﷺ, as I said, waited for 3 days and stopped the morning after that. And this is different from, how long is the iddah? How long is the iddah? 4 months and 10 days. This is the iddah in Islam, 4 months and 10 days. And this is out of respect for the husband, right? This is out of respect for the husband. Okay. Zayd ibn Haritha was also one of the ones that passed away. And the Prophet ﷺ saw his son, Osama ibn Zayd. The son of Zayd ibn Haritha, Osama ibn Zayd, looked very much like his father. And when the Prophet ﷺ saw him, he would tear up. And Osama ibn Zayd was 13 to 14 years old at the time. And he went into the masjid, Prophet ﷺ went to the masjid, and he found the companions crying. And he said to them, why are you crying? And they said to him, because the best of us has passed away. And they were referring to Zayd ibn Haritha after Mu'tah. Right? Remember the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha before, what did she say? She said, if Zayd ibn Haritha had been alive when the Prophet ﷺ had died, the Prophet ﷺ would have said, make him the Khalifa. This is how much he respected and loved Sayyidina Zayd ibn Thabit, right? So they're crying, and the Prophet ﷺ has another famous hadith where he says, don't cry, my ummah is like a beautiful garden. This is wallahi a beautiful, amazing hadith, just like all the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He said, my ummah is like a beautiful garden whose owner comes in to, you know when someone's taking care of roses, for example, what do they do to the branches sometimes? They cut them out, they clean them up, they put the fertilizer, they clean it up so that it grows even more crops and more fruits and more plants. And my ummah is like that. Meaning what? What does he mean by that? More leaders will always come. More leaders always, and this is 100% true of the ummah. 100% true of this ummah, subhanAllah, right? It doesn't matter how many people you think you've killed or assassinated or bombed or whatever. There will always be more people, better people that keep coming up from the people that you think you just finished, right? And then the Prophet ﷺ has another hadith. This is an amazing hadith. This hadith has the following. The Prophet ﷺ says the following. He says, Allah will not humiliate an ummah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning this ummah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never humiliate an ummah where I am the first, meaning the Prophet ﷺ is the first messenger, and he's the one that comes up leading it. And then the last one is who? Isa alayhi salam. Right? Meaning Isa will show up in this ummah. You're going to show up as a messenger, but he's also going to take a leadership role in this ummah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never humiliate an ummah where I am, the first that takes the leadership, and Isa alayhi salam is the one that takes the leadership right at the end. Okay, so let's wrap up and just talk about some conclusions here before I move on, there's another fiqhi event here that happens that we should talk about. So one of the things that happened in Mu'tah is a group of the people that went to fight with the Sahaba is called the Maddadin, and they came from Yemen. They're just the group of companions that came from Yemen, and so they had their own little special division, if you like, amongst the army. And one of them was making the Sahaba was actually killing a goat, and he said, "Hey, can I use the skin to make an armor?" He said, "Yes." So anyway, he takes it, he makes his little skin, so he goes into the battle with the goat skin. And a Roman lieutenant is challenging him on the other side. The Roman lieutenant is decked out in armor, like full armor, not sheepskin or whatever that this Muslim had. And some of the riwayat actually say the armor was made of gold. Anyway, the Muslim finishes off the Roman. And when he finishes off the Roman, he takes all his stuff. So he takes the armor, he takes his sword, he takes this, he takes that. Khalid ibn Walid, on the way back, he looks at this guy and he's like, where'd you get this stuff from? He's like, I killed him. It's my ghanima. If I killed him, it's my ghanima. And Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid says, it's too much for you. I'm not going to let you take it. He says, it's too much. Like, you like, dude, like you've got like a whole thing right there. And he's still, Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid, new to Islam. Like he doesn't know. He doesn't know any better, right? So he's still new to Islam. By the way, what is the rule? What's the correct ruling here? Whoever kills it gets it, right? Finders keepers, so to speak, right? Okay. And then do you remember the shares, the division of shares between the soldier and between the horseman? What? 3-1. 3-1. 3 for the horseman, 3 for the horseman, and 1 for the foot soldier, right? So he says, I'm going to complain to the Prophet ﷺ when he goes back to Medina, and he goes and he complains to the Prophet ﷺ. He says, Ya Rasulullah, Khalid will take this from me. And the Prophet ﷺ brought Khalid. He said, did you do this? He said, yes. And he said, why? He said, because he had too much. And then he says, give it back to him. So Khalid ibn Walid is about to give it back to him. And the man starts to make fun of Khalid ibn Walid in front of the Prophet ﷺ. He starts to mock. He's like, I told you so. Didn't I tell you? You should have known I was right. You should have listened. Like, he starts to listen to that. And the Prophet ﷺ got very angry. He got very angry at him. And he said, you don't talk to him like that. He says, you leave my commanders for me. He says, leave my commanders for me. He says, because of what you did, you're going to return the stuff back to me. So he punishes him for that. What's the lesson that we take? Respecting the chain of command. Respecting the chain of command. Right? So even though you disagreed, that's not the way for you to behave with your commanding officer, so to speak, right? And so the Prophet ﷺ taught us this lesson. By the way, there's another ruling here that the fuqaha take from this decision of the Prophet ﷺ with this man, which is the qadi in Islam, the judge, is permitted to change his ruling based on new evidence. New evidence. Just we have this in modern day law. Oh, they found the DNA of blah, blah, blah. This person is now innocent. We have this, right? So a judge is permitted to change the ruling based on new evidence, right? And the Prophet ﷺ says, umara'i, right? By the way, there's a long fiqhi conversation about who are considered umara, where they, so like Sayyidina Khalid al-Walid was picked by the army. Are the people there now considered umara? The answer is no. We're not going to go there, but like you guys get what I'm saying, right? And that's why Abu Bakr, for example, radiallahu anhu, his official title was what? Khalifatu Rasulullah. After the death of the Prophet ﷺ, he became Khalifa, which means he's following up on the message of the Prophet ﷺ. Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab was actually called what? Khalifatu Rasulullah. The Khalifa of the Khalifa of the Messenger, and Amir al-Mu'mineen, obviously, right? So that's where some of these titles come. Okay, I wanted to respond to something you said, and subhanAllah, you brought it up, which was a great point. So there's actually, because I love to bring what the enemy says about Mu'tah as well, right? It's like we know the Muslim perspective. Now let's see what the enemy says about Mu'tah. So Mu'tah is mentioned by a very early Byzantine historian, and his name is Theophanes, and he has a book called the Chronicles, right? And in the Chronicles, it's a very early book. Like it literally happens at the time of Heraclius. The Heraclius that we know at the time. He writes this, and he says, and he mentions Mu'tah, and he mentions the Prophet ﷺ, and he's a Roman author, and he basically says in the year 636, he gives like all these dates. The Roman era, the year, this 22nd year of the rule of Heraclius, who was the king of Rome at the time, the Romans had heard of a new religion. So he registers that the news of a new religion had gotten to the Romans at the time. And a man claiming to be a messenger of God was there in Medina, preaching to them. And by the way, this man is nasty because he actually, in all the modern day Islamophobes, like, oh, they do this. He mentions them, and it's like he talks in that manner about these Muslims, like they're backwards people. They do this, they do that. He has this in his book, and he says by a village he calls it Mukeya or Mocheya or whatever. The Muslims chose a day of festival to come and attack the Romans, right? So could be that was a day of festival for them, and it would have made sense. Like, you're distracted, that's when I'm going to come and make my attack. And he says that they were informed based on a spy in the pay of Vicarius. So Vicarius Theodore was the brother of Heraclius, and it is said that he's the one that at least came and provided supervisory command over the army. So the brother of Heraclius himself. So he had a spy amongst the Muslims that came and told them about the day that they would attack. Right? So he says this. And then he says, in Mu'tah, we killed 3 of their emirs. He uses that word emirs. But by the way, even the Europeans use that term later. When they started to encounter them, they use this term emir. We killed 3 of their emirs. And then he says, one emir survived, called the sword of Allah. So he says, one emir died, called the sword of Allah, and he caused massive losses on the Roman side, and he's the one that was able to cause them to survive this whole ordeal. Right? So this is from the other side. And by the way, why do you think, so we'll close off maybe with this question, why do you think Khalid ibn al-Walid died on his deathbed? Sword of Allah cannot be killed. Sword of Allah, there's wisdom in that. There's wisdom. Like, we all know the famous last words of Sayyidina Khalid ibn al-Walid on his deathbed. He's like saying, like, I participated in so many battles. There's not a part of my body that doesn't have a wound from a sword or a spear, yet I'm dying on my bed like a cow. He's saying this, right? And he says, give my sword to whoever will pick it up And he says, may the eyes of cowards never sleep. May the eyes of cowards never sleep. Very famous words of Shaykh al-Barid. But that's because he is the sword of Allah. You can't kill the sword of Allah, right? So he has to die a regular death on his bed. And this was, by the way, what's the next event on that year? Next major event? Next major event after Mu'tah? Fath Makkah, 8th year of Hijrah, right? And then Yarmouk is way later. Yarmouk happens at the time of the Khilafah of Sayyidina Umar al-Khattab, also with Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid. Massive defeat of the Romans, massive defeat right south of Damascus. And this is, by the way, the biggest message now, back to winning and losing, that was delivered after Mu'tah. What do you think was the most important message delivered after Mu'tah? Mu'tah. Don't mess with us. You're exactly right. The message delivered, the Romans were in complete shock. The Romans were, this is the first experience now that they've had with these Muslims from the desert. And they're in complete shock as to the outcome of the battle. They're in complete shock at the fact that they even dared to gather these men and march them all the way up to Jordan. They're just in complete and utter shock that this has happened. And in the fact that they couldn't defeat them. So this is now message number one. Remember what Heraclius said when the message of the Prophet ﷺ went to him? He said, he will conquer these lands that I'm standing on. If I was with him now, I'd wash his feet. He said, if this is true, if what you said is true, he will conquer the lands I'm standing on. This, subhanAllah, is exactly what happened. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم اغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء والأموات إنك سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وإسرافنا في أمرنا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم انصر الإسلام وأعز المسلمين. اللهم انصر الإسلام وأعز المسلمين. اللهم انصر الإسلام وأعز المسلمين وعلو برحمتك كلمة الحق والدين. اللهم نسألك رضاك والجنة ونعوذ بك من سخطك والنار. اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خير. I'll see you next week إن شاء الله. Assalamualaikum. How are you doing? Good to see you. How are you doing? Assalamualaikum. How are you doing? Good to see you. How are you doing? Assalamualaikum. Assalamualaikum. I didn't see you.